You are trying to solve something, and it is not going well. That is what is actually happening tonight, underneath everything else. Not fretting exactly, not simply feeling bad. If you listen to the shape of what has been going on in your head for the last hour, it has the form of work. There is a problem, and you are turning it over and looking at it from another side and considering what you might do, and then considering what would happen if you did that. It feels responsible. It feels like the sensible thing to be doing about something that genuinely matters, and like the sort of thing a person who took their life seriously would be doing. And it is 1 o'clock in the morning, and you have been at it for an hour and a half, and you have not produced one single usable thing. No decision, no plan you would actually carry out, nothing written down. That is the subject of tonight. Not fear exactly. Fear is a different animal altogether, and it arrives faster and leaves faster and does not bother with sentences. This is the other one, the verbal one, the one that sounds like thinking and feels like duty and goes round and round and round. We are not going to try to stop it. Nobody has ever stopped it by trying, and the attempt is one more thing to fail at this hour. We are going to look at what it actually is and where it works and why it cannot possibly work here. And then we are going to soften around it, which is a different thing altogether from fighting it, and which is the only thing that has ever loosened it. Before we go further, settle in properly. There is nowhere to be and nothing here to accomplish. If you would like, feel free to share what time it is where you are and what the night is doing outside your window. And if you would like to carry these quiet hours into other evenings, this channel is also on Spotify. The link is waiting in the description below for whenever you want it, which does not need to be now. You do not need any background in Buddhism to be here. You do not need to concentrate or remember anything or arrive anywhere by the end. There will be old teachings and slow stories and long stretches where very little happens, and none of it is a test. If your attention wanders off in the middle of a sentence and comes back 3 chapters later, that is not a failure. That is the sound of a person falling asleep, which is exactly what this is for. So let the body arrive. Let your weight be handed over completely to whatever is holding you. The mattress, the pillow, the blanket over your legs. Let the shoulders come down away from the ears. Let the jaw loosen. Let the hands rest wherever they have fallen. Take one slow breath in and let it go out again without managing the way it leaves. And let us begin with a clock. It was a mantel clock, not valuable, oak cased with a brass face, that had belonged to his wife's father and had stopped some time in the autumn. He was a practical man, retired from something that had involved doing things properly, and he had mended a great many objects over the years. Mowers, a boiler once, most of a motorbike in his 20s, and the clock had been sitting on the side in the kitchen for 3 months waiting for him to get round to it. And at about 1:30 in the morning, being awake anyway and not seeing much prospect of anything else happening, he got up and came downstairs and got round to it. That is the beginning of the story, and it is already the whole point of it. But let us go on anyway, because the details are what make it useful. He did not put the big light on, because his wife was asleep upstairs, and the big light in that kitchen was fierce. He put on the little light over the hob, which lit the hob beautifully and nothing else in the room. He got the clock down off the side and put it on the kitchen table, which is not a workbench, has a slight wobble on one leg, and is exactly the wrong height for close work. He did not have the right screwdriver, and he knew it, and he went ahead anyway, which is the detail everybody recognizes. He had a screwdriver that was very nearly right, which is a thing that has ruined more objects in more houses than any other single cause in the whole of domestic history. And he opened the back of it and started taking things out and putting them on the table, which was fine and orderly for about the first 8 pieces. It is worth saying that he was enjoying himself up to that point. That is part of it too. The first 20 minutes of taking anything apart at 2 in the morning feels productive and rather satisfying. Then 2 things happen close together. He turned something that was under tension without expecting it to be under tension, and there was a small musical noise, and a spring went somewhere, and in reaching after it, he caught the edge of the table with his elbow, and a number of the small parts that had been in a sensible row were suddenly in a considerably less sensible arrangement, and 2 of them were on the floor. He spent 40 minutes on his knees on a cold kitchen floor at 2 in the morning with his phone torch held in his teeth, sweeping his hand under the units, finding 1 spring, a dried pea, a good deal of dust, and not the other spring. He gave up at about 3:10, which is rather later than he admits when he tells it. He put everything he could find into a cereal bowl. He went back up to bed and did not sleep, and lay there in the dark constructing an increasingly elaborate plan for the morning, which involved a specialist screwdriver set, a magnifying lamp, a shallow tray with a lip on it, and possibly a man in the town who was supposed to be good with clocks, in the morning, in daylight, without kneeling down. In about 4 minutes, he found the second spring sitting in plain view against the edge of the cupboard plinth. And then he looked at the cereal bowl in the light and at the clock and worked out that the thing that had been wrong with it in the first place was a pin that had come loose, which he could see clearly now and had not been able to see at all the night before, and which would have taken him 10 minutes and a proper screwdriver at any point in the preceding 3 months. His wife, who is a kind woman, said only 1 thing about it at breakfast and did not look up from her toast when she said it. You want to stop taking clocks apart in the dark. He did get it going in the end. It took a fortnight and a proper set of screwdrivers he had to order, and 1 part from a man in Leeds who sold clock springs by post and had strong opinions about people who work on kitchen tables. The clock is on the mantelpiece now and keeps reasonable time. And what he says about the whole episode, when it comes up, is not that he was a fool. He was not a fool. He is a competent man who has mended a great many things. What he says is, I could see about 4 inches of it. Come back now gently to your own room, to the dark and the weight of the blankets and the small sounds a building makes at this hour. Here is what worry actually is, and it is worth being precise, because the imprecision is part of why it has such a hold. Worry is the repair mode. It is not fear. Fear is a fast, physical, whole-body event that arrives when something is threatening you now, and it does not use many words. Worry is slower and almost entirely verbal. Sentences, scenarios, if this then that. And it is the mind doing the thing it is genuinely rather good at, which is taking a problem apart to see how it works and what might be done about it. That is not a malfunction. It is one of the best things a human mind does. That capacity is the reason there are bridges and vaccines and roofs somebody worried a problem into pieces in daylight with the right equipment and looked at the pieces and put it back together better than it was. Every useful thing in the room you are lying in came out of somebody doing that. The difficulty is not the capacity. The difficulty is that it has been switched on at 2 in the morning, in a kitchen with one small light over the hob, with the wrong screwdriver, on a table that wobbles. Look at what you are actually working with at this hour. You have no information. Everybody who could answer the question is asleep. Every office is shut. Every record you would need to check is unavailable. And the one person you would want to ask cannot be asked until at least 9. And you have no way of testing anything. Every conclusion you reach in the next hour will be untested. You cannot check it against the world, or against another person, or against the actual look on somebody's face. It will have to be believed or disbelieved purely on the strength of how convincing it sounds at 2 in the morning, which is not a reliable measure of anything at all. You have no tools. You cannot make a call, send anything, look anything up in any useful way, or take a single action in the world, and you are working in the dark on a surface that wobbles, with a brain that is running on a fraction of the resources it will have at 10 o'clock tomorrow morning. Tiredness does not simply make thinking harder. It changes what the mind produces. It narrows the range of options it can see, sometimes down to 2, neither of them good. It weights everything toward threat, because a tired brain is a cautious brain. It makes the worst case look considerably more probable than it will look over a cup of tea. So the mind takes the clock apart, and it does it with total conviction, because that is what the repair mode feels like from inside. There is no sensation of working badly. There is a sensation of finally getting to grips with something, of at last giving it the attention it deserves, right up until the moment the light comes on and loses the springs into the carpet. That is what has been happening in your head all night. Not solving, disassembly. In poor light, with the wrong tools, with pieces going quietly into the carpet, so that you will wake up tomorrow with the problem in more pieces than it was in when you started, and a new set of worries about the pieces. Now, the useful part. Nobody's telling you not to think about it. That never works, and the instruction is insulting. And every person who has ever been told, just don't think about it. At 1 in the morning has wanted to throw something. What is being said is smaller and much easier to accept. Not now, because the light is bad. That is not avoidance. It is what any competent person does with any real job. You do not rewire a house by torchlight because you happen to be awake. You do not do your accounts at 3 in the morning. Everybody accepts this about every other kind of work, without argument, and then makes a single exception for the most complicated material there is, which is a human life with other people in it. And notice that the exception is never argued for. Nobody has ever lain in the dark and consciously decided that 2 in the morning is the optimal hour for reviewing their finances or their marriage. It simply happens because the mind is awake and the problem is available, and there is nothing else in the room to occupy it. Availability is not the same as readiness. The clock was available for 3 months on the kitchen side, and the one night he was least equipped to do anything about it was the night he began. So the whole of the instruction tonight is a scheduling matter rather than a moral one. You are not being asked to stop caring, or to decide the thing is unimportant, or to talk yourself into a calmer view of it. You are being asked to notice that the workshop light is off, and that everybody who does careful work knows what that means. Let us rest here for a while. There is nothing here to be worked out tonight. Not one thing on the whole list. Not because it does not matter, but because it matters enough to be done in daylight, with the right screwdriver, by somebody who has slept. Let the shoulders come down. Let the arms be heavy. Let the hands lie open on the blanket. Let the jaw come apart very slightly so the teeth are not touching. Let the tongue rest low in the mouth. Let the space between the eyebrows go smooth and wide. Let the breath come in and go out, and let the going out be slower than the coming in, without your making it so. The workshop is shut. It is not shut forever, and nothing has been abandoned. It is shut until it is light, the way workshops are. When you are ready, we will go on together. Because the mind's next move is entirely predictable, and it is worth heading off. It says, "Fine, but I have started now, and I cannot simply leave it in this state. I have to at least get it back to where it was before I go to sleep." And that is precisely how a clock ends up in a cereal bowl. There is a village where the water went strange for 3 days one summer, and a man from the water board who put up a sign that everybody ignored. Let us go and look at the well. The village had its own water supply, which people who have always had mains water find rather hard to imagine. There was a well at the top end of the village, under a small stone housing with a slate roof and a padlocked wooden door, and a spring feeding it from somewhere in the hill behind, and a pump that had been put in some time in the 1950s, and a network of pipes that had been laid by people who were by then mostly dead, and whose plans nobody had. It was very good water indeed. Everybody said so, and visitors said so, and there was a certain amount of quiet pride about it that nobody would have admitted to. And in the July of that year, the pipe running from the well down to the tank failed, somewhere under the lane opposite the chapel, and had to be dug out and replaced in a hurry. It took 2 days in hot weather with the lane shut. There was a digger and a hole, and 2 men in a van, and a good deal of standing around the hole with hands in pockets, which is what a hole in a village reliably produces within about 20 minutes. And on the second afternoon, when the new section was in and the water was turned back on, the man who looked after the system, a man in his 60s who had been looking after it since his father stopped, and his father before that, walked down the lane and put a piece of card in the window of the village hall, and stopped at 3 houses on the way back up, and told everybody he saw the same thing in the same words. Do not draw water for 3 days. It will clear on its own. Let it stand. The reason for the sign is not obvious unless somebody tells you, and it is worth knowing. Because when you disturb a well, when you dig near it, or work on the pipe, or drop anything into it, you do not put dirt into the water. Not really. What you do is stir up what is already lying at the bottom, and has been lying there quietly for years, doing nobody any harm at all. The silt comes up off the bottom. The water goes cloudy, properly cloudy, the colour of weak tea, and then it clears again, entirely on its own, if it is simply left alone, in about 72 hours from beginning to end. He explained all of this to about 12 people over the course of that afternoon, patiently, more than once, in the way of a man who has explained the same thing every few years since 1971. Nobody meant to ignore him. That should be said clearly, because it is the whole of the story. But there was a woman with a baby who needed water that evening, obviously and unarguably, and she drew a bucket and it came up brown, and she tipped it out on the path and drew another one straight away to see whether the second one might be any better. And there was a man who kept hens, who drew twice that evening and twice more before 8 the next morning, on the entirely sensible grounds that he wanted to know what he was dealing with before the day started. And then there was a fellow at the far end of the row, and everybody in a village knows who this man is, who was thoroughly annoyed about the whole business from the beginning, and who checked the water by his own count and freely admitted 11 times in the first 24 hours. What none of them knew, because why would they, is the bitter physics that makes this so unforgiving. Every draw pulls water through the well. Every pull through disturbs whatever has begun to settle since the last one. The silt that had spent 6 hours drifting downward is lifted back into suspension by one bucket and starts again from the top. By the second day, his water was noticeably worse than anybody else's in the village, which he took as clear evidence that the repair had been botched, and said so at some length to whoever would stand still. He was not lying, and he was not exaggerating. His water genuinely was worse. He simply had the cause and the effect the wrong way round, which is an easy thing to do when you are the one holding the bucket. And at the far end of the lane there was a cottage where nobody was at home at all, because the couple who lived there had gone up to Scotland for a fortnight and had left on the Monday morning before the dig started. They knew nothing about the dig, or the sign in the village hall window, or the fellow at the end of the row and his 11 buckets. They came back on a Saturday afternoon, unpacked, and put the kettle on. Their water was perfectly clear, cold and clean, and tasting of the hill, exactly as it always had. The man who looked after the system was asked about this several times over the following weeks, in the way that villagers ask about things at the shop and over walls. And what he said, more or less every time, was the same sentence. It does not clear because you check it. It clears because you leave it. There is a detail he used to add when he was in the mood, and it is the part worth keeping. The silt at the bottom of that well is not dirt in any sense that matters. It is fine mineral sediment that has come out of the hill over the course of a century and a half, and it is entirely harmless, and it is the reason the water tastes the way it does, and the reason people were proud of it in the first place. It only becomes a problem when it is in the wrong place, which is to say, when it is in motion. Come back now, gently, to your own room, to the dark and the weight of the blankets, and the breath moving quietly in and out. Water that has been stirred settles on its own if you stop stirring it. Water that has been stirred does not need to be persuaded. It does not need a technique applied to it, and there is nothing anybody can do to the silt to make it fall faster. That image is very old, and it turns up in the Buddhist tradition again and again, in different centuries and different countries, usually to make a simple point about the mind. That clarity is not something you manufacture. It is simply what is there when the disturbance stops, which is a lovely thing to say and does not, on its own, tell you what to do tonight. So let us take the useful part, which is the well rather than the metaphor. The problem in that village was not the dig. The dig was necessary, and it was done properly, and it took 2 days. The problem was the checking, and nothing else at all. And this is exactly what worry does at 1 in the morning. And it is the mechanism nobody explains. You are not simply worrying about the thing. You are checking on it. Watch what actually happens in a cycle that takes perhaps 90 seconds and that you have been through perhaps 40 times tonight. The thought arrives. You turn it over for a while. Nothing new comes of it. Something in you gets tired of it and it recedes on its own. And there is a gap, 30 seconds, a minute, of relative quiet, in which the silt begins, entirely imperceptibly, to drift downward. You almost never notice those gaps, because there is nothing in them to notice. That is what a gap is. And then you check. You go back to see whether it is still there, whether you feel any better, whether that thing you thought of a few minutes ago actually helps, whether you are any closer to sleep and what time it is, and whether the worry has loosened at all, and the water goes brown again immediately from the top. That is the whole cycle. And here is the part that catches everybody. The checking is not a lapse in the process. The checking is the process. It is what worry is made of. Worry is not a state of feeling bad. It is a repeated action, a returning, a reaching, a bucket going down again and again into water that would clear in 3 days if nobody touched it. Which is genuinely good news, if you can hear it as good news, rather than as one more thing to get right. A state is very hard to change. An action can simply not be taken. And notice that the check-in is entirely reasonable. Nobody in that village was being stupid. A woman with a baby needs to know whether the water is fit to use. A man with hens has a legitimate interest. The fellow at the end of the row was annoyed and wanted to know when it would be sorted out, which is not an unreasonable thing to want. Every single drawer of that bucket had a perfectly good reason behind it at the time. That is why this is so hard to stop, and why being told to stop worrying is useless. Each individual return to the problem feels justified, because it is justified in isolation. It is only the pattern that is the difficulty, and you cannot see a pattern from inside a single instance of it. That is worth sitting with, because it explains something that has probably bothered you about yourself. You are not lying there being irrational. You are being extremely rational, 40 times in a row, about a thing that does not respond to rationality at this hour. And the 40th application of good sense is doing exactly what the 11th bucket did. So here is what is actually being asked tonight, and it is smaller than it sounds. Not stop worrying, not think positively, or reframe it, or look for the silver lining, or count anything, or picture a beach. All of those are things to do, and things to do are buckets, however pleasant they sound. Just do not go back and check. That is all. One thing, and it is a thing you leave undone, rather than a thing you have to manage to do. When the thing recedes for a moment, and it does recede several times an hour, considerably more often than anybody notices, let the gap simply be a gap. Do not put the bucket down to see how you are doing. Do not test whether the calm is working. Do not check the clock to see whether you have made progress, which is the most expensive bucket of all and tells you nothing you can use. That is the entire practice, and it is a practice of not doing rather than of doing, and which is therefore difficult in a completely different way from all the things that are difficult because they are hard work. And there is one particular check that I want to name, because it undoes more nights than any other. Have I stopped worrying yet? That one. The monitoring of it. lying there and taking your own temperature every couple of minutes to see whether the settling has begun. That is a bucket, every single time, without exception, no matter how gently it is asked. And it is the most reasonable question in the world, which is precisely why it is so effective at keeping the water brown. You cannot supervise the settling of a well. Nobody in the history of wells has managed it. The whole thing only works in your absence. Whatever it is in you that is capable of quietening down does so when nobody at all is watching. And the couple who came back from Scotland to clear water did nothing whatsoever to earn it, and were not there. And that is precisely why it worked. And if you want a reason to trust that this works, since you cannot verify it tonight without doing the very thing we are talking about, here is the only one available, and it is quite good. You have fallen asleep every night of your life, not all of them easily, but every single one, without exception, ending in sleep that arrived on its own, without your supervision, and mostly at a moment you did not notice and could not describe afterward. You have never once seen it happen. That is not a coincidence. It is the mechanism. The settling occurs in your absence every night, and has done for however many thousand nights you have been alive, and it has never needed you awake to do it. Let us rest here for a while without checking on it. Let the shoulders come down. Let the arms be heavy. Let the hands lie open on the blanket. Let the jaw come apart and the tongue rest low in the mouth, and the space between the eyebrows go smooth and wide. Let the breath come in and go out, and let the out-breath be the longer of the two without your arranging it. And when the mind goes to check, as it will, within the next minute or two, and then again after that, you do not have to be annoyed about it or count it as a failure. Simply notice the reach and let the bucket stay where it is. Nothing is being tested tonight. Nothing needs to be verified or confirmed or established before morning. The well is doing what wells do in the dark at its own rate, without any assistance from either of us. When you are ready, we will go on together, because there is a second engine underneath the checking, and it is the one that makes worry feel infinite rather than merely repetitive. Every answer you find generates two new questions. That is not a flaw in your particular mind. It is what happens when you plan for a future in a room with no information. The branches multiply faster than you can walk them, and there is no end ever, because the end does not exist. There is a woman at a kitchen table with a highlighter and 3 printed timetables, planning routes for a journey that is going to be cancelled on the Thursday. Let us go and look over her shoulder. She has 3 timetables printed out, which tells you something about her before we go any further, and 2 highlighters, and a notebook open at a fresh page with a date written at the top. It is 20 to 1 in the morning. The interview is 9 days away, in a city 3 hours off, at 10 o'clock in the morning, and it is a job she actually wants. The first one in about 6 years that she has properly wanted, rather than merely applied for. So she is planning the journey thoroughly the night after the email came. And she is good at this. That is the thing to hold on to through what follows. She is not a silly woman, and everything she's doing is sensible. The direct train gets in at 9:20, which gives her 40 minutes at the other end. That is the plan, and it is a good one. And if she had stopped there, she would have been in bed by 1. Then, at about 10 to 1. But what if that 1 is cancelled? Which is not a foolish question. That line has been cancelled twice this year that she knows of. So she finds the earlier train, the one that gets in at 10 to 8, which means leaving her house at 5:30, which means a taxi, which means booking one the night before, because there is no guarantee at that hour. Good. That is plan B, and it is a sound one. Then, but what if the earlier one is cancelled too, and they put on a replacement bus? So she looks up how long the replacement bus takes on that stretch, which involves finding a forum post from 2 years ago, 50 minutes longer, which would still be all right, just about, if it left on time. And what if it does not leave on time? Because replacement buses famously do not. In which case, she would need to get a train the night before, which means a hotel, which means money. And are there hotels near that station? And how much? By this point, it is 1:10, and she has 3 routes and a hotel to consider. And then it branches properly. Because what if there is snow? It is February, and it snowed in that city last February, and she finds herself looking up a long-range forecast for a date 9 days out, which is a thing no forecast in the world can usefully tell anybody about anywhere. And what if the taxi simply does not come at 5:30, which taxis at 5:30 have been known not to do? And what if the station car park is full, in the version where she drives to the station? And what if she drives the whole way, which she had not been considering? But what about roadworks? And what about parking in a city she does not know? And are there roadworks? And she opens another tab. And what if she gets there in perfectly good time and then cannot find the building at all? And what if she finds the building and the entrance is round the back, which happened to her once in Manchester in 1998, and which has evidently been waiting quietly inside her for 20-odd years for its moment to come round again? At 2:20, she has, by her own late account, when she looked back at the page, something in the region of 16 separate versions of the same single morning, written out in a notebook in 2 colours. And at 2:20, she is not one single step closer to being in that room at 10 o'clock than she was at 12:30, when she had one good plan and a printed timetable and could have gone to bed. She goes to bed at 3 and lies there in the dark running the replacement bus version again, from the beginning, twice. On the Thursday, 6 days before the interview, and 4 days after the night with the highlighters, she gets an email. The person who was going to interview her has had something come up. Would she mind if they moved it to the following month? She does not mind at all, and says so, and replies pleasantly within the hour. And she sat there afterward at the kitchen table feeling something she could not name for a good while, and eventually identified as flatness, which is not remotely what she had expected to feel. She had rather thought she would be relieved. 6 days of nothing to plan. 16 versions of a morning. Every one of them gone in a sentence, none of them ever tested, the entire structure evaporating without leaving anything behind at all. And here is the coda, and it is the useful part. She did go the following month, on a grey, mild Tuesday. The train ran on time. There was no snow anywhere in the country. The taxi came 4 minutes early. And what actually went wrong was that the lift in the building was out of order, and the meeting had been moved to the 4th floor, and she arrived at the top of 4 flights of stairs at 2 minutes to 10, out of breath, in the wrong coat, having had no warning of any of it. She stood on the landing for about 30 seconds, getting her breath back and taking her coat off and hanging it over her arm. And then she opened the door and went in and did the interview and got the job. Not one of the 16 branches had a staircase in it. There is one more thing she noticed later, and it is the part she found least comfortable. Within about 2 days of that email, she was doing it again. Not about the interview. That was gone entirely. About something else. A conversation she needed to have with her sister, planned in the same way, in the same chair, at approximately the same hour, in the same 2 colors. The material had changed. The machine had not. Come back now gently to your own room, to the dark and the weight of the blankets, and the breath moving quietly in and out. Here is the engine that makes worry feel infinite, and it is worth understanding because it is not a personal failing. It is a structural feature of the thing. Worry branches. Every answer you find generates at least 2 new questions, and each of those does the same. That is not an occasional misfortune. It is the mathematics of planning under uncertainty, and it applies to everybody, and it is why the process has no natural end. Look at the shape of it. 1 question. What if the train is cancelled? Answer. Take the earlier one. And immediately the answer becomes a new object with its own vulnerabilities. The earlier one could be cancelled, the taxi could fail, the alarm could not go off. And each of those has answers, and each of those answers is a new object. 2 branches, then 4, then 8, then 16 in a notebook, in 2 colors, at 20 past 2 in the morning. And the 17th was already forming when she finally put the pen down. The tree does not stop growing, because there is always one more thing that could happen. The supply of possible events is infinite, and your night is not. And the tradition has a word for this, which I find genuinely useful because it names the thing precisely. The word usually gets translated as proliferation. The idea is that the mind takes one thing, one plain event, one sensation, one question, and does not leave it as one thing. It spreads out from it. It elaborates. 1 becomes 2, becomes 10, becomes a whole tangled thicket. And by the end, you are a very long way from anything that is actually happening. In a structure you built yourself out of nothing but what if. It is one of the oldest observations in the tradition, and it is roughly 2,500 years older than the printed timetable, which suggests the mechanism is not a modern affliction and has very little to do with phones. And here is what makes it so convincing from inside. Every individual branch is reasonable. Trains genuinely do get cancelled. It genuinely does snow in February. Entrances genuinely are sometimes round the back. Not one of her 16 versions was fantasy. Every single one described a thing that could really happen, and a sensible response to it. The error is never in the branch. The error is in the belief that the tree can be finished, because that is the actual goal underneath all this, and it is worth naming plainly. What the mind is reaching for at 2 in the morning is not a plan. It is completeness. The feeling of having covered everything so that nothing can arrive unprepared for. It is a strange thing to want when you look at it in daylight. Nobody has ever been complete about a Tuesday, let alone about a journey, let alone about another person. And completeness is not available, not to anybody, ever, about anything. It is not a high standard that you are failing to meet. It is a thing that does not exist, and every hour spent reaching for it is spent reaching for something that is not there. So the practical question is not, how do I stop worrying? It is, what would let me stop? And there is an answer. and she found it the following month without meaning to. Planning stops when it produces an action. That is the difference between the useful thing and the tangle, and it is a test you can apply in about 4 seconds. Ask of any branch, is there something I would actually do about this? The train might be cancelled. Yes, there is an action. Check the alternative once, note it, done. 2 minutes in daylight. It might snow in 9 days' time. No, there is no action. There is nothing to be done about that tonight, or tomorrow, or on any day before the day itself, and no amount of looking at a forecast will change what falls out of the sky over a city in February. A branch with an action attached is planning. A branch with no action attached is proliferation, and it will grow all night if you feed it. There is a second half to the test, and it is the one that matters at this hour. Can that action be taken now? Almost never. Checking a timetable is a daylight job. Booking a taxi is a daylight job. Speaking to anybody at all is very much a daylight job, which means that even the branches that are real and useful and genuinely need doing do not need doing at 2 in the morning. And writing one line in a note on your phone takes 11 seconds and closes them properly until the light comes. And notice the other thing she discovered on those stairs. The one thing that actually happened was not on the tree. That is not bad luck. That is the norm. It is what everybody finds every time, in every situation anybody has ever prepared for. Reality has a texture that cannot be generated in advance. It contains lifts that are out of order, and rooms that have moved to the 4th floor, and people who turn out to be considerably kinder than you expected, and small details you could not possibly have generated because you were not there. Nobody has ever imagined a real morning in advance. They have only ever imagined a thin sketch of one, made of the 4 or 5 features they happen to think of, which means the tree was never protective in the first place. It could not have been. The thing that got her up 4 flights of stairs and through the door at 2 minutes to 10 was not preparation. It was her arriving and dealing with what was actually there, which is what people do and which requires no branches at all. There is a kind of grief in giving that up, and it should be acknowledged rather than skipped past, because if the tree cannot be finished, then you cannot make yourself safe by thinking, and most people have been trying to do exactly that for most of their lives. The branches were never really about trains. They were about arranging things so that nothing can hurt you unexpectedly, and putting that down means accepting that some things will simply arrive, and that you will meet them when they do, in the room where they happen. That is a real loss, and it is worth a moment. It is also, once it settles, the most restful sentence in the world. Let us rest here then, and leave the branches unwalked, not because they are silly, and not because you are, because they are infinite, and because you have already got the 2 or 3 that have actions attached, and the rest are weather. Let the shoulders come down. Let the arms be heavy. Let the hands lie open on the blanket. Let the jaw come apart, and the tongue rest low in the mouth, and the space between the eyebrows go smooth and wide. Let the breath come in and go out, and let the out-breath be the longer of the 2 without your arranging it. And when the mind offers you another, and then what, as it will in about a minute, you do not have to answer it. A question does not have to be answered simply because it has been asked, and certainly not simply because you were the one who asked it. Let it stand there unanswered, and let the branch stay unwalked, and let the whole tree go on being unfinished. because it was always going to be. When you are ready, we will go on together, because there is something that makes all of this much harder to put down, and it is worth looking at directly. You have probably noticed that you cannot simply stop, that the mind will not release something that feels unresolved, that it will come back to an unclosed thing again and again, long after it has stopped producing anything useful. That is not stubbornness. It is a mechanism, and it has a purpose, and it can be satisfied. There is a bookkeeper somewhere with a difference of 1 penny in a set of accounts, and a weekend she never got back. Let us go and sit with her at that desk. The accounts were out by 1 penny, not £1,000, not £1. 1 penny, a single unit of the smallest denomination there is, in a set of year-end accounts for a small charity that ran 2 minibuses and a day centre in a converted chapel, and which turned over rather less in a year than most people would guess. She found it on the Friday afternoon at about 4 o'clock, when everything else had come out and she had been about to put the kettle on and go home in a good mood for the first time in a fortnight. Everything reconciled. Bank to ledger, ledger to nominal, all the way through. 3 months of tidying up somebody else's filing, and it had all come right. Except that at the very bottom of the page, where the 2 figures should have matched each other exactly, one of them ended in a 7 and the other one ended in an 8. She checked the addition. The addition was right. She checked it again with the calculator and then a 3rd time on paper, and it was right on all 3 occasions. The treasurer, who came in on Friday afternoons and had done for years, was entirely relaxed about the whole thing. He said what any treasurer in the country would have said, which was, put it to suspense, note it, and let it go. A 1 penny difference in a set of accounts of that size is not a problem. It is not an irregularity. It does not mislead a single person about anything whatsoever, and there is a perfectly respectable convention for dealing with it that has existed for about as long as there have been accounts and auditors to look at them. She said she would just have another look at it before she went. He said, kindly, and meaning it, that she really did not need to, and that he would sign it off exactly as it stood. She stayed until 7, with the office empty and the lights off at the far end. On the Saturday morning she let herself into the office, which she had a key for, and which was cold, because the heating went off at 6 on a Friday, and did not come on again until Monday, and she sat there in her coat with a calculator, and went through the purchase ledger entry by entry. 380 some entries, one at a time, ticking each against the invoice. She did the whole lot by 4 in the afternoon and found nothing. On the Sunday, she went back in the same coat and started on the bank statements. And at about 1:30 on the Sunday afternoon, 3/4 of the way down a page she had already looked at twice, she found it, a bank charge applied in the previous October, of an amount that included a penny of interest adjustment, which had been posted to one account and not picked up in the other, entirely because of the way that particular statement had broken across 2 pages with the total repeated at the top of the second. 1 line, in October, of a penny, 11 hours. And what she noticed, in the cold office on the Sunday, with the whole thing finally balanced, and this is the reason we are here, was that what she felt was not triumph. It was release, a completely physical sensation, in her chest and across her shoulders, of something letting go all at once. She described it afterward, more than once, as the feeling of a heavy door swinging shut somewhere and clicking properly into its frame. She had not known, until the moment it stopped, how much of her had been holding it open. It had been going on underneath everything since 4 o'clock on Friday, through supper, through a film she could not afterward describe, through most of a night. On the Monday morning, the treasurer worked out what she had done and was concerned rather than pleased, and said something that was not a criticism. 11 hours, for a penny. And she said, I know, I do know, I could not put it down. And he, who had been doing this for 30 years and had seen it before, said, that is not because you are thorough. You are thorough on Tuesdays and you go home at 5. It is because it was open. She tells the story against herself these days, and she has noticed that everybody who hears it does the same thing at the same moment. They all say they would have done exactly the same. Not one person, in 20 years of her telling it, has ever said they would have put it to suspense and gone home at 5. They all know they should have. They all agree the treasurer was right. And every single one of them, given a cold office and a key and a Saturday, would have gone through 380 entries looking for a penny. Come back now, gently, to your own room, to the dark and the weight of the blankets, and the breath moving quietly in and out. Here is the mechanism that keeps you awake, and it is not a character flaw, and it is not even really about the content of the worry. The mind will not let go of something it believes it is still holding. And notice that this is a good feature. It is not a defect that somebody has left in you. A creature that could put down an unfinished thing at will would put down all of them, and nothing would ever get done, and every arrangement anybody made would evaporate the moment it became inconvenient. The door holding is why you are a person who can be relied on. It is simply working at the wrong hour. That is the whole of it. Not something important, something unclosed. The two are not the same. And 1 penny in a set of charity accounts is the proof. Watch how this works in your own life because it is completely consistent and slightly comic. An email you have been meaning to send for 3 weeks sits in your chest all day and surfaces at odd moments. In the shower, in a meeting, on the stairs, and takes 90 seconds to write. And the instant it is sent, it vanishes so completely that you cannot remember what was difficult about it. A phone call you have to make sits on you for 4 days and colours a whole weekend, and then takes 6 minutes and ceases to exist so thoroughly that you forget you ever dreaded it. A thing you were supposed to bring in from the car nags at you from the moment you sit down, and goes on nagging through an entire television program and takes 40 seconds and a pair of shoes. None of those are important. They nag because they are open, and the mind is holding the door with its foot, and it will go on holding that door for as long as it believes nobody else is holding it. And that is what is happening at 1 in the morning. And it explains the thing that makes no sense on the face of it, that some enormous worries let you sleep and some trivial ones do not. A large difficulty that is genuinely in somebody else's hands this week can sit quite peacefully. A small one with a loose end will keep you up till 4. You are not lying there because the problem is enormous. Sometimes it is enormous. But a good deal of what keeps people awake is not size at all. It is unclosedness. The mind has a set of open doors, and the day's noise has stopped, and it is going round checking that each of them is still being held, which explains something that has probably confused you. You have noticed, surely, that being told to stop thinking about it does not work, not even slightly. not when other people say it, and not when you say it to yourself. Here is why. Stop thinking about it is a request to abandon the door and walk away from it in the dark. And the mind will not do that. It cannot, and it should not. A system that let go of unfinished things simply because it was tired would be a very poor system, and you would have missed a great many appointments over the course of your life. But it will accept something else, and this is the useful part. It will accept a handover. That distinction is everything, and once you have seen it, you cannot unsee it in your own behavior. Not abandonment, transfer. Not let go of it, but give it to somebody. The door is not being let go of. It is being given to somebody at a specified time, in a specified way. That is why the smallest and most unimpressive technique in the world works better than any amount of reasoning. Write it down. One line, not the solution, not the analysis, not a paragraph. The item, and when you will look at it, and nothing else at all. Ring the surgery. Tomorrow, after 9. Ask him about the money. Sunday, when we are both awake. Check the statement. Saturday. It sounds far too simple. Everybody who has ever been told it has thought so, and has dismissed it, and has come back to it years later. And it works for a reason that has nothing to do with psychological trickery. It works because it is true. That is worth dwelling on, because it is the difference between this and every technique that has ever failed you. Nothing is being managed here. You are not distracting yourself, or reframing anything, or persuading yourself that a thing matters less than it does. You are simply making an accurate arrangement, and then informing the part of you that has been on duty all night that the arrangement exists. You will actually look at that note. That is the whole mechanism. The mind is not being fooled into standing down. It is being given accurate information that the thing is recorded and that a specific future moment exists in which it will be dealt with by somebody competent, and that the person holding the door now can therefore take their foot out of it. If you write it down and never look at your notes, it stops working within about a week, because the mind is not stupid and it audits, and a promise that has been broken 4 times is not a promise anymore, which means the small unglamorous habit of actually reading the list in the morning is not tidiness. It is what keeps the whole arrangement solvent. And there is one more thing worth knowing about this, which is the reason it must be a time and not simply a note. I will deal with it soon does not close anything. Neither does I will sort that out at some point. Those are not handovers. They are the door being held slightly differently. The mind requires a moment, a real one, with a day attached, because that is what allows it to stop tracking the thing continuously. Tomorrow at 9 is a moment. Soon is not, and never has been. And the mind has known this about you for years. And there is a version of this for the things that cannot be handed over at all, which should be said, because otherwise the whole chapter only helps people whose worries have phone numbers. Some open doors have nothing behind them that you can do. Somebody else's illness, a decision that is not yours, a result that will arrive when it arrives. There is no note to write and no 9 o'clock that will settle it. For those, the handover is different, and it is the honest one. Not I will deal with this tomorrow, but there is nothing here for me to hold. The door is not being passed to a future version of you. It is being recognized as a door that was never yours, standing in a wall you did not build. That is harder, and it does not work every time. and it is the whole subject of tomorrow's chapters rather than a sentence at this hour. But it is worth knowing that the mind can put that down too, when it finally believes there is nothing to be held. Let us do that now, and then rest. You do not have to get up. You do not have to find a pen, or turn a light on, or wake anybody. If there is something in your chest that is genuinely undone, you can simply say to yourself, clearly, once, as an actual undertaking rather than a hope, tomorrow, after breakfast, I will look at that, and then let the door swing shut on its own. If it will not close, if you say the sentence and the door stays open, that is all right. Sometimes the mind wants it written and nothing else will do. If that is the case, write the one line and come straight back. That is not a defeat of any kind. It is simply the handover being completed properly, and it will cost you 90 seconds and buy you the rest of the night. Let the shoulders come down. Let the arms be heavy. Let the hands lie open on the blanket. Let the jaw come apart, and the tongue rest low in the mouth, and the space between the eyebrows go smooth and wide. Let the breath come in and go out, and let the out-breath be the longer of the two without your arranging it. Nothing is being held open in this room tonight. Nothing is waiting on you between now and the light. When you are ready, we will go on together. Because there is one more reason people cannot put worry down, and it is the strangest of them all, and almost nobody will say it out loud in daylight. Underneath a great deal of worrying, there is a quiet belief that the worrying is doing something, that holding somebody in mind keeps them safe, that the one night you stop is the night something happens. Nobody defends that belief. Almost everybody has it. There is a man who has taken boats out of a small harbour for 40 years and who does 3 particular things every time before he leaves the wall, and who was once asked by a young hand whether he actually believed in them. Let us go down to the harbour and hear what he said. There are 3 things he does before he takes a boat off the wall, and he has done all 3 of them in the same order, in every weather, for something in the region of 40 years. He puts his right boot on first, always, without exception, in 40 years. If he catches himself reaching for the left one, he stops and starts again, and he does this without embarrassment and without comment. He touches the top corner of the wheelhouse door frame on his way in, every time, with his right hand. Not a pat, and nothing anybody would notice if they were not looking for it. 2 fingers, briefly, on a bit of painted wood that is worn noticeably paler than the wood around it, which tells you rather more about how long this has been going on than he ever would. And he coils the stern line in a particular way and lays it in a particular place, which is a perfectly good way to coil a rope, and by no means the only good way, and which he has never once varied in the whole of his working life. The young hand who asked him about it had been on the boat about 6 weeks. He was 19 years old, and he asked it in the way that 19-year-olds ask things, which is to say directly and at the worst possible moment, halfway out on a flat grey morning with nothing much happening. He said, "Do you actually believe in all that, or is it just something you do?" And the skipper thought about it for long enough that the boy assumed he had given offence, and started to say something else, and was waved quiet. Then he said, "No." The boy waited. "I do not think the door frame holds the boat up. I do not think the sea has any interest in which boot I put on. If you ask me straight out whether any of it makes the slightest difference to whether we come back in, I would say no, and I would mean it. He adjusted something on the throttle that did not need adjusting, which is what men do instead of pausing. And I have done all three every time for 40 years, and I am not going to stop. The boy asked why not. And here is the answer, which the boy remembered for the rest of his life and repeated to other people, usually badly. Because I know it does nothing, and I still do not fancy finding out what it feels like to go out without doing it. There is more, and he told it later, on a different day, in the harbour, in the way that men like that tell things, sideways, and only once. There was a morning sometime in the 80s when he was rushed, and it is the only time in 40 years that he can remember it happening. Weather coming in from the west, a tide he had to catch, and somebody shouting at him from the wall about something that turned out not to matter. He went out without touching the door frame and did not notice until they were 20 minutes clear, and he thought about it, on and off, for the entire day. And the day was completely uneventful, and the sea did nothing of any interest whatsoever, and they came in at 5 with a decent catch and nobody a penny the worse. And there was another year, and this is the part he does not tell often, and did not tell the boy for a long time, when he did all three correctly in the right order, on a morning like any other morning. And a boat went down that week, off that same stretch of coast, in weather that nobody had been particularly worried about, with a man aboard he had known since school, and had sat next to for 4 years. He had done all three that morning as well, in the right order, without hurrying. So I know, he said, I know exactly what it is worth. It is worth nothing at all. He said that without any bitterness, which the boy noticed at the time and understood about 15 years later. And then the thing that makes this a chapter rather than an anecdote. It is not for the boat. It never was. It is what I do instead of standing on that wall being frightened. You have to do something with it. And 40 years ago I picked those three, and now they hold it for me. That is all they have ever done, and it is not nothing. The boy did not take up any rituals of his own, as far as anybody knows. He is in his 50s now and has a boat of his own, 2 harbours along the coast. But somebody who worked a season with him noticed that he always makes tea before they go out. Every single time, whatever the weather is doing and however late they are running. He has never mentioned it to anybody and would probably deny it if he were asked. Come back now, gently, to your own room, to the dark and the weight of the blankets and the breath moving quietly in and out. Now, the reason we went down to that harbour. There is a belief underneath a great deal of worrying that almost nobody will say out loud, and that almost everybody has. It is this, that the worrying is doing something, that holding somebody in your mind at night in a state of concern is a form of protection, that the vigilance is load-bearing, and that somebody has to be doing it, and that the somebody is you, that if you were to stop, properly stop, put it down, sleep well, and not think about them for a week, that would be the week something happened. Read that again, and notice how quickly something in you wants to say, well, obviously not, and how little that changes what happens at 2 a.m. Nobody defends this in daylight. If you said it plainly to somebody at 11 a.m, they would look at you and say, of course not, obviously not, what a strange idea. And then they would go home and lie awake that night, doing precisely and exactly it. So let us take it seriously for a moment, rather than laughing at it, because it deserves better than being laughed at, and because there is something true underneath it that we will come to. First, the plain examination, which takes about 4 seconds, and which you have almost certainly never actually done. Does your lying awake affect a scan result? Does it affect a road 200 miles away, or an aircraft engine, or somebody else's driving on a wet Tuesday, or a decision being taken in a room you are not in and have never seen, or a set of cells somewhere doing whatever it is that cells do? You know the answer. You have always known the answer. There is no mechanism by which it could. There has never been a mechanism, and no version of Buddhism or any other honest tradition has ever suggested that events arise from anything but their own causes and conditions, of which your 2 o'clock in the morning is not one. And now the second thing, which is the more important one, because it is the reason the belief survives despite everybody knowing better. It cannot lose. Watch the structure of it. If you worry and nothing bad happens, then the worrying appears to have worked and it is reinforced. If you worry and something bad happens anyway, then clearly the worrying was insufficient or aimed at the wrong target or not sustained long enough. And the conclusion is that you must worry harder or earlier or more accurately next time. There is no possible outcome that counts as evidence against it. Anything that cannot be disproved by any outcome whatsoever is not a belief about the world. It is a habit wearing a belief's clothes. And once you have seen that, the thing loses a certain amount of its authority. Not all of it, and not immediately, but some. You cannot quite take instruction from something that was always going to say the same thing regardless of what happened. And there is a cruelty in it that I want to name, because for some people listening, this is the whole of the matter. If worrying protects people, then not worrying is negligence. And if something happens to somebody you love, then it is, somewhere in that arithmetic, your fault for not having held them in mind hard enough, or on the right night, or about the right thing. That is a monstrous thing to carry, and a great many people are carrying it quietly, and have been for years, and have never said so to anybody, because saying it out loud would make it sound as mad as it is. So let me say it plainly, and then we will move on and let it settle rather than dwelling on it. Nothing you have failed to think has ever harmed anybody. If something has happened to somebody you love, it did not happen because you slept. There was no night on which you should have stayed awake and did not. There is no vigil that was missed. That is not how any of it works, and it has never been how any of it works. Now, the true thing underneath, because there is one, and the skipper found it. The impulse is not stupid. It is love with nowhere to go. That is the whole of it, and it is worth being gentle with yourself about, because it means the thing keeping you awake is not a defect in you. It is the same thing that makes you useful to people in daylight, when you care about somebody and there is genuinely nothing you can do, because they are grown, or far away, or ill, or making their own decisions. The caring does not stop. It has all the force it always had, and no outlet at all, and it will go somewhere, because that much feeling does not simply sit still and wait, and in the absence of anything better, it goes into vigilance, because vigilance at least feels like doing something. You have to do something with it. That is the honest bit. Telling a person who loves somebody to simply stop is useless. because the love is still there and it will find a channel. So the question is not how to care less. It never was. And any teaching that tells you to care less about the people in your life should be closed and put down. The question is what to do with it instead. And the tradition's answer is much older than any of us and is not complicated. Wish them well. That is it. That is the whole of the alternative. And it is so unimpressive written down that most people skip past it. And it is the oldest instruction in this tradition for exactly this situation. Not rehearse their disaster. Wish them well. Actively, deliberately, in words, silently, for about 30 seconds. May they be safe. May they be well. May they be at ease tonight, wherever they happen to be, whatever is or is not happening. That is not a lesser version of worrying, and it is not a consolation prize for people who cannot manage the real thing. It is the same love, going out in a form that does not corrode you, and it has one enormous advantage over vigilance. It can be completed. You can finish wishing somebody well. You cannot ever finish worrying about them. There is no last worry, and no version of tonight in which you get to the end of the list and feel that they are covered. And if it helps to think of it as the skipper's door frame, a thing you do because you have to do something which you know perfectly well does not steer the boat, then think of it that way. He was not wrong about his 3 rituals, and he was not being foolish. He was only slightly wrong about which part of the arrangement was carrying the weight. And notice one more advantage it has, which matters at this particular hour. Wishing somebody well is not vivid. It does not generate scenes or dialogue or corridors or the look on somebody's face. It produces almost no pictures at all, which is exactly why it does not wake you further up. Whereas rehearsing harm is essentially watching a film, and nobody in the history of the world has fallen asleep in the middle of a film they were making themselves. That is not the reason to do it, but it is a reason it works. Let us do that now, and then rest. Whoever is in your mind tonight, and there is usually somebody, bring them to mind for a moment. Not the scenario, not the thing you are afraid of, and not the version of them in the middle of it. Just them as they actually are, doing whatever they are actually doing at this hour, which is almost certainly sleeping, and say it silently in whatever words are yours, without hurrying. May you be safe. May you be well. May you rest tonight. And then let them go on with their own life, which is theirs and not yours, and which has been proceeding perfectly well without your supervision the entire time you have been lying here. Let the shoulders come down. Let the arms be heavy. Let the hands lie open on the blanket. Let the jaw come apart, and the tongue rest low in the mouth, and the space between the eyebrows go smooth and wide. Let the breath come in and go out, and let the out-breath be the longer of the two without your arranging it. Nobody is being kept safe by your being awake tonight. Nobody ever has been on any night, anywhere. You are allowed to put the watch down. It is not your watch, and it never was. When you are ready, we will go on together. Because there is one more thing to try, and it is the most practical instruction of the night, and it comes from an old doctor who used to write prescriptions for things that were not medicines. He gave a man 20 minutes a day and a particular chair, and the man thought he was being made fun of. Let us go and sit in that consulting room. The surgery was 2 converted rooms at the front of a house on a main road, with a bay window and a radiator that made a noise all through the winter, and a doctor in it who was 2 years off retiring and had been in that room since 1974. The man sitting opposite him was 48 and had come in for sleeping tablets. He was quite straightforward about it. He was not sleeping. He had not slept properly since about the middle of March, which was 4 months by then. He was making mistakes at work that he would not have made a year ago, and being short with his wife over nothing at all, and he wanted something to knock him out for a fortnight so that he could get back on top of things and then come off it. The doctor asked what happened when he went to bed, and the man said what everybody says, which is that his brain would not switch off, that the moment the house went quiet, it all started up. Money, mostly. His father's care home, and what would happen when the money for it ran out. A situation at work that had been going on since March and that nobody would deal with, and that it did not stop, and that it went round, and that he had tried everything. The doctor listened to all of it without writing anything down, and asked a few more questions, some of which seemed to the man to be beside the point, and then reached across for the pad. And the man relaxed slightly in his chair, because he assumed he was getting what he had come for and could go home. What the doctor actually wrote was 20 minutes, 6:30, the chair by the window, every day, and he tore the sheet off and handed it across the desk without any ceremony at all. The man read it once and then read it again, and his face did something complicated, and he said, with a certain amount of heat, because he was tired and he had waited 3 weeks for the appointment, that he did not think this was funny. The doctor said it was not intended to be funny, and that he had been handing this particular prescription out for the better part of 30 years, and that it worked considerably more often than the tablets did, which he was also perfectly willing to prescribe if it came to it, and would do in a month if the man wanted them. He said that in the same voice he had used for everything else, which was what convinced the man he was serious. The man did not entirely stop being annoyed, but he stopped being quite as annoyed, largely because the doctor did not appear to be enjoying himself. Then he explained the rules, which took about 4 minutes altogether, and which the man wrote out on the back of the piece of paper, because he could tell he would not remember them. Same time every day, 6:30 or whatever hour suited him, but the same one every day and not a movable one. Same chair, not the sofa, not the bed, not standing at the kitchen counter. One chair, used for nothing else at that hour, and preferably not the one you read in. Sitting up, properly, feet on the floor. Not lying down, never lying down. 20 minutes, timed, with an actual timer rather than an estimate. Not 15 because you have had enough of it, and, this one matters more, not 40 because you are on a roll and getting somewhere. And in that 20 minutes, this was the part that surprised him. Worry. Properly. Deliberately. That was the part that surprised him most. He was not being told to relax in the chair. He was being told to go at it. Write it down. List it. Turn it over. Follow the branches as far as they go, in a notebook, in whatever detail it demands, and do all of it on purpose, at a time you chose, sitting up, with a clock running. The doctor's phrase for this, apparently, was that you cannot dismiss a thing you have never properly heard. Then stand up, leave the chair, and leave the notebook in it or beside it, and go and do something with your hands. And that is the end of the matter until tomorrow evening. And when it comes back at other times, in the car, in a meeting, halfway through a conversation with somebody at 11 o'clock at night. You do not argue with it, and you do not tell it. It is being ridiculous, and you do not push it away. You say, silently, one sentence, in an ordinary tone of voice, without arguing. 6:30, in the chair. The doctor also said two things that the man remembered as being important, and they were both negatives. Do not do it after 8 in the evening, whatever the reason, and however much you feel like it. And do not do it in bed, ever, not once, because the bed is for sleeping. If you do the worrying there, then over a few months, the bed quietly becomes a place where the worrying happens. And once that association is made, you will spend the better part of a year undoing it. And most people never work out why lying down has started to feel like clocking on. Here is how it went, which he told the doctor at the follow-up. He did it, mostly because he had waited 3 weeks for the appointment and did not want the 3 weeks to have been for nothing. The first week was appalling. He sat in the chair at 6:30, feeling ridiculous, and then he started, and he used every second of the 20 minutes and wanted more, and stood up at 6:50, feeling considerably worse than when he sat down. The second week was much the same, except that on the Thursday, he noticed something that stopped him for a moment. He had written down the same 3 things in more or less the same words on 5 consecutive days. By the 3rd week, something had changed slightly. He ran out at about 11 minutes on the Tuesday and again on the Wednesday. He sat there for the remaining 9 minutes, feeling faintly foolish, trying to generate something worth writing down, and could not manage it. By the 6th week, he was forgetting to do it altogether on some days, and having to be reminded by his wife. And on the days he did do it, he was mostly making a short and rather practical list. And at night, this is the part that matters, the worry still came. It absolutely still came most nights, at about the usual hour. But when it did, and he said the sentence, 6:30, in the chair, it went about half the time, and on the other half it stayed, but did not have the same grip on him. He did not describe it as a cure, and neither did the doctor. He described it as the worry no longer having the run of the house. The doctor retired 2 years later, and the practice was absorbed into a health centre on the other side of town. The man is in his late 60s now, and still has the chair, which has followed him through 2 house moves and been recovered once. He uses it perhaps once a month, when something is genuinely going round, and he still does the 20 minutes, and he still stands up at the end of them. He kept the piece of paper too, with the rules on the back in his own handwriting, and he's shown it to about a dozen people over the years, most of whom assumed he was joking. Come back now, gently, to your own room, to the dark and the weight of the blankets and the breath moving quietly in and out. Here is why that works, and it is the same principle as the bookkeeper's one-line note, applied to a whole habit rather than to a single open loop. The mind will not accept suppression. It will accept containment. Those 2 words sound similar, and they are opposites. Suppression is, do not think about this, and it fails always for everybody, because the instruction requires you to monitor whether you are thinking about it in order to check whether you are complying, which means holding the thing in mind constantly all evening in order to establish that you are not holding it in mind. Everybody has felt this, and nobody has ever named it for them. That is why stop worrying makes worry worse rather than better. It is not weakness, and it is not a lack of discipline, and no amount of being better at it would help. It is a structural fault in the instruction itself, and it would defeat anybody. Which means every time you have failed to stop worrying by deciding to, you are not failing at something achievable. You are being asked to do a thing that cannot be done. Containment is different. Containment says, yes, absolutely. At 6:30, in that chair, for 20 minutes, thoroughly. There is no suppression anywhere in it. Nothing is being forbidden. Nothing is being called silly. And no part of the arrangement requires you to think well of yourself. The worry is not being told it is unwelcome. It is being given an appointment, which is what it has been demanding all along. And that is the thing to understand about what has been happening in your head for the last 2 hours. And once you see that, something else about the whole night makes sense. Worry is not asking for a solution. If it were asking for a solution, it would have stopped at the first one you found. It is asking to be attended to. That is an entirely different demand, and unlike a solution, it can actually be met. That is all it has ever wanted, and it is very insistent about it, and it will keep interrupting until it is convinced that somebody has taken it seriously, which is why the 20 minutes works and why stop it does not. One of them is a refusal, and the other is a firm and reliable appointment, and the mind, like most persistent things, will settle for an appointment. 2 more honest things before we go on, because a chapter like this can promise more than it should. The first is that it takes weeks. The man's first fortnight was worse, not better, and if he had judged it on the Thursday of week 1, he would have thrown the paper away. Anything that reorganizes a habit of years takes longer than a few nights. And a technique judged on Tuesday is a technique abandoned by Friday. The second is plainer. If your sleep has been badly broken for months rather than days, really broken night after night, then that is worth taking to a doctor in daylight, in the ordinary way. Not because something is wrong with you, but because a person who has not slept properly since the spring deserves rather more than a recording, and there is a great deal that can be done. Now, I am not going to pretend you can do any of this at 1:30 in the morning. You cannot. The chair is downstairs, and it is the middle of the night, and sitting up now would be the worst thing you could do. So tonight's version is smaller, and it is the same sentence. When the worry comes back, and it will several times in the next hour, you do not argue with it, and you do not tell it to go away, and you do not try to solve the thing it has brought. You say, silently and without heat, tomorrow, not now, and you mean it, because you will actually give it time tomorrow, 20 minutes, in a chair, in daylight, with a pen. That is not a trick to get rid of it. It is a real appointment, and the worry can have it, and it will get every second of it. That is the whole difference, and it is the difference between something that works and something that has never worked for anybody. You are not refusing it. You are rescheduling it. And notice that you can say the sentence without any conviction at all, and it still does its job. This is not a matter of believing hard enough. The appointment either exists or it does not, and if you keep it tomorrow, the sentence gets stronger every night for a fortnight without any effort on your part. Let us rest here for a while, in a room with nothing pending in it. Let the shoulders come down. Let the arms be heavy. Let the hands lie open on the blanket. Let the jaw come apart, and the tongue rest low in the mouth, and the space between the eyebrows go smooth and wide, Let the breath come in and go out, and let the out-breath be the longer of the two without your arranging it. The chair is empty. Nothing is sitting in it. It is downstairs in the dark with nobody in it, and nothing will sit in it until the evening. And this room is for sleeping. That is the whole of what it is for, and it is very good at it, and it has been getting on with that job for years without needing to be told. When you are ready, we will go on together, because there is one more thing, and it is not a technique at all, and it is the piece that people find hardest to believe until they have felt it once. Everything so far has involved doing something with the worry, rescheduling it, handing it over, declining to check on it, all useful, all daylight work. But there is something else available in the middle of the night, and it is not a maneuver. It is a change in how you are holding the thing, and it takes no effort whatsoever, and it is almost impossible to describe without sounding vague. So let us not describe it. Let us go and watch a horse lean on a man, and a young apprentice learn, over about 6 weeks and a good deal of backache, why bracing against 1,000 pounds of animal is the one thing that guarantees you will lose. The horse is about 17 hands, and a good deal of him is shoulder, and he is not being difficult on purpose. That is worth saying at the start, because the boy holding his back leg is quite sure by this point that the animal has decided to destroy him personally. He is 19 years old. He is 4 months into an apprenticeship with a farrier who works out of a van and covers something like 40-yard spread across 2 counties, and he has been told approximately once a day for 4 months to stop bracing, and he has not the faintest idea what that means, and has begun to suspect it is one of those things people say to apprentices for the pleasure of it. Here is what he is doing. He has the hind leg up between his knees in the way you do, and the horse has begun to lean, not violently and with no ill will in it whatsoever, just settling, putting his weight down through the boy the way a man puts his weight through a fence he happens to be chatting over. And the boy has done what every human being does when something heavy leans on them. He is locked, feet planted, knees stiff, arms rigid, back set, jaw clenched, every single muscle he has pushing back up against something in the region of 1,000 pounds of entirely relaxed horse, which lasts about 90 seconds before his thighs start burning, and about 3 minutes before he begins doing sums about how much longer he can hold it. And the horse, who is not being difficult on purpose, and who has simply discovered something solid to rest against, leans a little more. By the time the farrier looks up from what he is doing, the boy is a shade of red that is not really available in ordinary life. His back is bent in a shape that will cost him a fortnight, and he has stopped being able to do anything with the file in his hand, because every part of him is occupied in the business of not being crushed. The farrier does not say anything sharp and does not sigh, which the boy notices. He just says, "Right, give him here." And he hands the boy the file and takes the leg, without any apparent effort, in about the same way you would take a coat off somebody. And the horse leans. And this is the bit the boy watched and did not understand for another 6 weeks. Nothing pushes back, nothing at all. The farrier does not brace. He keeps hold of the leg. He does not drop it. He does not go slack. The leg stays exactly where it needs to be for the work. But there is no resistance anywhere in him. When the horse's weight comes, he moves with it slightly, shifts his own feet, changes his angle, and the weight simply goes through him and into the ground, and finds nothing to press against. And the horse, having put his weight onto something that turned out to offer nothing whatsoever to put weight onto, quietly stands himself back up. Nobody tells him to, nobody corrects him. He simply discovers that there is no bargain available and does the only other thing there is to do, which is to hold himself up, which he was perfectly capable of all along. 4 seconds, maybe 5. The boy is still counting them out when it is over. He stands square and puts his own weight back onto his own 3 legs and stays there, entirely unbothered. And the farrier gets on with the shoe. And the whole thing is so completely undramatic that if you had been walking past the yard at that moment, you would not have noticed that anything had happened at all. That is the other difficulty with it. It does not look like anything. There is nothing to admire and nothing to copy. He is not leaning on you, the farrier said later in the van. He is leaning on what you are giving him. Give him nothing, and there is nothing to lean on. A horse cannot lean on air. And then the more important sentence, which the boy wrote down that night, because he could tell it mattered, and he still did not understand it. Soft is not slack. If you drop the leg, you are no use to me. You hold it. You just do not fight it. It took him 6 weeks, and a genuinely bad back for a fortnight of them, and a great many horses at a great many yards. Nobody could shorten it for him. The farrier had tried explaining it perhaps 30 different ways by then, and had run out of them. And the moment it happened was with a mare at a yard near the river, who leaned on absolutely everybody and always had. And he took her hind leg, and something in him, out of tiredness more than technique, he thinks, did not lock. She leant, in the way she always did, expecting the usual argument. He moved with it. She found nothing at all. She stood up square and stayed there, and he did the whole hoof in 11 minutes with no pain in his back at all. And he stood up afterward and had to go and lean on the van for a minute, because he had just understood something, and it had gone through him like cold water. He is in his 40s now, and has apprentices of his own, and he says the same thing to them that was said to him, roughly once a day, and watches them fail to understand it. He has stopped trying to explain it properly. He says there is no explanation that works. There is only the moment when a horse leans on somebody who is too tired to fight it, and the horse stands up, and the person has to go and lean on a van for a minute. Come back now, gently, to your own room, to the dark and the weight of the blankets, and the breath moving quietly in and out. Everything else tonight has been something to do. Reschedule it. Write the one line down. Do not put the bucket back in the well. Wish them well instead. All daylight work, all useful, all of it requiring a certain amount of effort and intention. This one is not that. This one is the opposite. And it is the peace that people find hardest to believe until they have felt it once. You have been braced for about 2 hours. Not metaphorically, physically. Go and find it now, without changing anything yet. There will be some of it in your jaw, some in the tongue, pressed up against the roof of the mouth, some in the hands and the forearms, some across the belly, which almost nobody notices, and a surprising amount behind the eyes. And what you have been bracing against all that time, with a good deal of your body, is a thought which weighs nothing at all, which cannot push. It has no weight. It cannot lean on anything at all. But you have been holding a position against it since about 11:30, and the holding is exhausting, and the exhaustion is nearly all of what you are experiencing as the difficulty of tonight. Now, This is not a suggestion that you give up and let the worry have you. That is the other failure, and it is worth naming clearly, because half the people who hear this teaching go straight there. Going slack is not the answer, and it is not what the farrier was doing. Dropping the leg means lying there being carried along by the worry with no contact at all, following every branch it offers, agreeing with all of it, in it up to your neck at 4 a.m. That is not softening, that is drowning. It arrives disguised as surrender, and it feels for about 90 seconds like giving in gracefully, and it produces the worst nights of the lot. Soft is not slack. That is the whole of it. What is being described is a third thing that English does not have a good word for, and which every tradition that has ever thought about the mind circles around. You stay in contact with what is here, and you stop pushing against it. The thought arrives, and it will in a minute, and then again after that. So let it arrive. Do not argue with it. Do not answer it. Do not try to make it leave, and equally do not chase it down its branches. Let it be in the room with you, the way the horse is in the yard. Let it lean, and give it nothing whatsoever to lean on, and it will do exactly what the horse did. Discover that it is holding its own weight, and stand up and stop. Because, and this is the thing the boy understood by the van, a tug of war does not end by somebody winning. It ends when one end lets go of the rope. That is the only way any of them has ever ended. The instant that happens, there is no contest, and the rope is just a rope, and the whole thing that felt like a battle turns out to have required both parties in order to exist at all. You have been the other end of the rope all night, which is not a criticism. Somebody handed you a rope and you took hold of it, as anybody would. And now the part that matters most, and it is the one nobody tells you, and it is the reason this is the 7th chapter rather than the 1st. Trying to sleep is bracing. It is the purest form of it there is, and almost nobody recognizes it as bracing, because it feels like diligence. You lie there applying effort toward a state that is defined by the absence of effort, which is rather like trying to force your way into being relaxed or straining to make yourself yawn. The harder you work at it, the further away it goes, and the working is itself the distance. Every person listening to this knows the feeling, the slightly grim determination that sets in at about 1 o'clock, the checking whether it is working, the frustration at 40 minutes gone, all of it effortful, all of it aimed at sleep, and all of it precisely the thing that keeps it at arm's length. So the instruction for the rest of the night, if it can be called an instruction, is this: stop trying to sleep. You are not required to produce it. It is not a task you have been set, and there is no examiner, and nobody is going to ask in the morning how well you performed. Not give up on sleep, not get up and do something. Simply stop applying effort in that direction, and let it be perfectly acceptable to be awake, warm, lying down in a dark room, at whatever hour it is. And notice how much of the distress of a bad night is not the wakefulness at all. It is the objection to the wakefulness. It is the arithmetic. 5 hours left, 4 hours left, 3, and the anticipated ruin of tomorrow, and the sense of something going wrong that must be stopped. Take all of that away, and what is left is a person lying comfortably in the dark, not asleep, which is not a catastrophe by any measure anybody has ever applied to anything. Being awake is not an emergency. It has never once been an emergency. And a person who is genuinely at peace with lying awake is, as everybody discovers eventually, a person who falls asleep, though not as a reward, and not because they did it correctly, and it does not work if that is why you are doing it. And there is one more thing about it that the tradition has been saying for a very long time, in various words, and that the farrier arrived at independently in a van. There are two ways of holding on to something, and they look like opposites and behave identically. There is grabbing at a thing, and there is pushing a thing away, and both of them are grip. Both require constant effort. Both keep you attached to the object by a rigid connection that has to be maintained. The third option is not indifference. It is contact without struggle. You are still there, still in the room with it, still holding the leg, and there is nothing rigid anywhere in the arrangement. Let us find the bracing now and let it soften, not slacken. Soften. Start with the jaw. Let the teeth come apart very slightly, just enough that they are not touching. Let the tongue come away from the roof of the mouth and rest low and soft. Let the space between the eyebrows go smooth and wide. Let the eyelids be heavy rather than held, and go behind the eyes, which is where most people are working hardest of all, without having the faintest idea they are doing it. There is an effort back there, a sort of quiet peering. Let that go. Let the eyes rest back into the head. Let the shoulders come down and back into the bed and further. Let the arms be heavy. Let the hands lie open on the blanket, holding nothing at all. And notice, if the fingers are curled, how long they have been like that. Let the belly be soft. That is the one people miss. Let the breath come down into it, and let it rise and settle without any help. And let the whole weight of you be given to the bed, which has been holding all of it since you lay down, without being asked, and which does not require your assistance. There is nothing in this room to push against. There never was. When you are ready, we will go on together, for the last part of the night and the longest rest, because there is one place the worrying mind cannot follow you, and it is not clever, and it is not a technique, and it has been available the entire time. There is a night nurse somewhere doing her rounds at 3 a.m, in a ward with 14 people in it, and she knows something about this exact hour that she has never had occasion to tell anybody. Let us go and walk down that corridor with her. It is a 14-bed ward on the 2nd floor of a hospital that has been added to 4 times, and it is 3:10 in the morning, and she does this same walk about every 40 minutes through the night. Rubber soles on vinyl, and the particular quiet of a building where several hundred people are asleep at once. A torch in her pocket that she uses as sparingly as she possibly can, because a torch in the face at 3 a.m. is a cruelty, and she has never forgotten being on the receiving end of one as a student. The lights are down to the low blue-white that hospitals use at night, which is not really dark and never has been, and which everybody who has ever spent a night in one remembers afterward. There is a machine somewhere doing what machines do. There is a man in Bay 3 who snores in a way that the entire ward has come to accept. She has been doing nights for 11 years, on and off, around 2 children, and a period when she nearly left nursing altogether. And there is something she knows about this particular hour that she has never had any real occasion to tell anybody outside the ward. Here is the first half of it. On any given night, on a ward of 14 people, at 3:10 in the morning, somewhere between 4 and 6 of them are awake. They are lying still, in the dark, with their eyes open, doing nothing at all. They are not calling for anybody. They are not making a sound. They are not reading or looking at anything or asking for tea. Most of them are lying on their backs, looking at a ceiling they know very well by now. And every single one of them is quite certain that they are the only person in the building who is not asleep. That is the thing she first noticed sometime in her second year and has watched night after night ever since. 4 people, 20 feet apart, each of them entirely alone at 3 in the morning, in a room containing 3 other people who are also entirely alone at 3 in the morning. If any one of them had said a single word out loud, the whole arrangement would have collapsed. None of them ever does, because it is the middle of the night and people are polite. And what she started doing, quietly, when she happened to be passing a bed where somebody's eyes were open, was to stop for a second and say something very small. Not, "Are you all right?" That gets fine, thank you, every single time at that hour, from absolutely everybody, and always has. She says quietly, in an ordinary voice, "You are not the only one awake." And the effect of that sentence is entirely out of proportion to the sentence. She has watched people's faces change on hearing it, properly change, in a way you cannot mistake. She has had people laugh, properly laugh, at 3 in the morning on a ward. She has had a man in his 80s say, "Is that right?" as though she had told him something genuinely remarkable, and then lie there for the next 10 minutes looking almost pleased about it. She never says anything else. She does not ask what is on their mind, and she does not offer to sit down, and she moves on and finishes the round. There is a second thing she knows, and it is the more useful of the two, and she tells people this one as well when it seems right. 3 o'clock in the morning is the bottom of the day, not emotionally, physically. The body has a rhythm through the 24 hours, and somewhere in the small hours it reaches its lowest point, core temperature at its lowest. Everything running at the slowest and thinnest it will run all day. It is, measurably and unarguably, the least resourced hour a human being has in the whole 24. Nobody is at their best at 3. Nobody has ever been at their best at 3. Surgeons are not, pilots are not, and neither is a person lying in the dark assessing their own life. And it is also, universally and famously, the hour at which everything in a person's life appears to be catastrophic and beyond repair. Those are not 2 separate facts about the night. They are one fact. She puts it to patients like this, and she has said it hundreds of times. It is not you. It is the hour. It lifts by about 5. And here is the part she offers as evidence, because it is the strongest thing she has. People tell her things at 3 in the morning that they would not tell anybody at noon. Real things, that they are frightened, that they think they are dying and nobody has said so, that they have not spoken to their son in 4 years and do not know how to start, that they cannot face going back to the house as it is now. She has heard a great deal of it, sitting on the end of a bed for 4 minutes with a jug of water she was supposed to be delivering somewhere else. And she sees the same people at 7, when the lights come up and the trolley starts and the ward turns back into a place where things happen. And at 7, they are ordinary. They are cheerful, often. 2 or 3 of them will make a joke about the night, or wave a hand at the whole subject, or say, "Oh, take no notice, I was being daft." Nothing has changed in their circumstances. Nothing whatsoever. Nobody has had good news between 3 and 7. No result has come back. No conversation has been had, no bill has been paid, and nothing whatsoever has been resolved by anybody. The only thing that has happened is that a body has come back up off the bottom of its cycle, and a mind has come back up with it, and the conclusions that felt like hard truths at 3 a.m. have quietly stopped being available. She has never written any of this down, and would be surprised to be told it was worth writing down. As far as she is concerned, it is not a theory about anything. It is simply what a ward looks like at 3 to somebody who has been walking through one for 11 years. She said once to a student who asked whether nights were depressing that she thought it was rather the opposite, that she had seen more honesty between 3 and 4 in the morning than in the whole of the rest of her working life, and that people are, on the whole, considerably kinder to one another at that hour than they are at noon. Come back now, gently, to your own room, to the dark and the weight of the blankets, and the breath moving quietly in and out. So let us take both of those things, because they are for you tonight. The first is that you are not the only one awake, not in a vague inspirational sense. Numerically, right now, at this hour, on your street, there is probably one. In your town, there are hundreds. In your country, hundreds of thousands. People lying in exactly this position, in the dark, in a warm bed, running exactly this sort of thing round exactly this sort of loop. Some of them frightened, some of them just wide awake. Most of them convinced that everybody else in the world is asleep. That is not a consolation prize, and it is not a trick. It is simply true, and it is one of the very few things about this hour that is verifiable. And the second is this: what you concluded at 3 a.m. is not information. It felt like information. It arrived dressed as information. That is precisely what makes this hour so convincing and so expensive. Those thoughts do not arrive as feelings. They arrive with a terrible clarity. This is what my life is actually like. This is what they actually think of me. This is how it is going to go. And they feel less like moods than like the truth finally getting through without the usual padding. They are not the truth getting through. They are what a tired brain produces at the bottom of its cycle, and they will be gone by 9:30 tomorrow morning, and you will look back at them with something close to embarrassment, exactly as you have on every previous occasion. And there is a test for it that costs nothing if you ever want to run it. Write one sentence down tonight in the dark on a phone. The flat, plain version of whatever you are currently certain about. Then read it at 11 the next morning. Almost nobody who does this ever needs to do it twice. You know this already. You have proved it hundreds of times, and it does not help at all at the time, which is why we are not going to argue with it. We are going to do something else instead, because there is one place the worrying mind cannot follow, and we have not used it yet tonight. Worry is made of language, every bit of it. Sentences, scenarios, questions. What if? It is all words running in a stream, and it requires words to exist, and the body is not made of words. Nothing in your left foot is a sentence. There is no argument anywhere in your shoulder. The weight of the blanket on your shins is not a proposition. There is nothing to argue with in the warmth of your own hands. And worry, which is enormously capable within its own medium, simply has no purchase there at all. That is not a metaphor, and it is not a spiritual claim. It is simply a description of where you can put your attention that the machinery cannot reach. So let us go down into the body now and stay there for a good long while. This is the longest and slowest part of the night, and there is nothing to understand in any of it. Let the whole weight of you be given over to the bed all at once, without holding any of it back. Feel where you are held most: the back of the head, the shoulder blades, or the hip and shoulder if you are on your side, and the heels. Let each of those places hand over a little more than it was giving a moment ago. And now let the attention move down through you, slowly, without hurrying anything. The scalp, loose, the whole of it, right down to where it meets the neck. The forehead, wide and cool. The space between the eyebrows going smooth. The eyelids, heavy. The small muscles all around the eyes, which have been working since morning and have not been off duty once, letting go now. Behind the eyes, that quiet effort we found earlier. Let it rest back. The cheeks, soft. The jaw. Let the teeth come apart very slightly. Let the tongue rest low and wide in the mouth. The throat, open and easy. The back of the neck, long and unhurried. The shoulders coming down and back into the bed, and then a little further than that. The upper arms, heavy. The elbows, the forearms, which have been holding on tonight in their own quiet way. Let them let go. The hands, the palms, and each of the fingers, one at a time if you like, all the way out to the tips, holding nothing at all. The chest rising and falling on its own, without instruction and without permission. The ribs moving a little at the sides. The belly soft. That is the one that matters. Let the breath come down into it, and let it lift and settle on its own. The lower back spreading and widening into the mattress. The hips giving their whole weight downward. The thighs heavy all the way round. The knees unlocked and doing nothing. The calves releasing. The shins. The ankles, both of them. The tops of the feet themselves, and the soles of the feet, which carried you through the whole of today and have not been thought about once since you took your shoes off. And let the whole front of the body be soft. Throat, chest, belly, the tops of the thighs. That is where people hold themselves ready without knowing it, and it can all be put down. Let the back of the body be heavy, the whole length of it, from the base of the skull to the heels, pressing gently down into what is holding it. And now the whole of you at once. Warm, still, horizontal, in a dark room, in the middle of an ordinary night, entirely held. Nothing above the surface needs to hold anything up. The bed has been doing all of it since you lay down. Let the breath come and go entirely without management. You have not been running it all night, and it has done perfectly well. A little longer on the way out, if that happens by itself, and when the words come back, as they will several times over, because that is simply what minds do, and there is no version of tonight in which they do not. You do not have to be annoyed about it. Just come back down. The blanket, the warmth, the next breath. There is nothing in this room made of sentences. Not the blanket, not the warmth, not the sounds outside, not the breath. Let us rest here for a long while. When you are ready, we will go on together quietly for the end of the night, because there is one last thing to say about all of this. And it is the honest one, and it is better said before morning than discovered afterward. The thing you are worrying about tonight will resolve. Most of them do. It will turn out one way or another, and the day will come when it is simply over, and you will barely remember the shape of it. And that is not the end of the worrying. There is a man who spent 11 months worrying about one thing and got the news he had been hoping for and had found something new within a fortnight. Let us go and sit with him on the afternoon he found out. The letter came on a Tuesday morning in June with the ordinary post, and he read it standing up in the hallway with his coat still on. Then he read it again. The site was staying open. 11 months of consultation. 11 months of meetings that produced nothing, of a single phrase, strategic review, which had come over those months to sound to him exactly like somebody clearing their throat before saying something unforgivable. 11 months of not knowing whether the place he had worked in for 19 years, where he had met his wife and been to 4 leaving DOS in the same room, would exist in a year's time. And it was staying open. His job, his colleagues, the whole thing. There was a paragraph near the end about restructuring that he read 4 separate times and decided, on balance, was manageable. He said afterward, without any embarrassment about it, that the 3 days that followed were among the best of his entire life. Not because anything had been gained. Nothing whatsoever had been gained. He had exactly what he had 11 months earlier and had spent a year of nights on it and got it back. And the return of a thing you already had and had spent a year expecting to lose turns out to be one of the more powerful experiences available to a human being. He slept that night. He slept the way he had not slept since the previous summer, 9 hours without waking once, and got up at 7 feeling as though somebody had come in during the night and lifted a wet coat off him. He was, briefly, extremely good company. Now, here is the part of the story that he tells against himself, and that he has told a number of people since, usually late in an evening. 12 days later, he was lying awake at 1:30 in the morning, wide awake, worrying about the roof. There was a slate off. There had been a slate off for about 2 years, on a part of the roof that had never let a drop of water into anything. And a man had come out in the spring and gone up a ladder and looked at it and given him a price on a folded piece of paper, and he had put the paper in a drawer and done nothing about it. And on that Tuesday night, 12 days after the letter, he was lying flat on his back in the dark, running through what it would cost, and whether the man was reliable and had done that sort of thing before, and whether it ought to be done before the winter or could wait until the spring, and what would happen if it were not, and whether the whole roof was the same age, and how much a whole roof costs. At about 2:00, having got as far as the possibility of the entire roof needing replacing before his daughter's wedding, he laughed out loud, properly, in the dark, in bed, alone, which he says woke his wife and required a certain amount of explaining, and did not go especially well at that hour, because he had seen it, not worked it out, seen it all at once, the way you suddenly see a thing that has been in front of you for years. The roof had not changed. Nothing about the roof had changed. The slate had been off for 2 full years, through 2 winters. It had been off for the whole of the 11 months, sitting quietly above his head every single one of those nights. And in all that time, it had not cost him 1 minute of sleep. Not one. It had not so much as crossed his mind in the dark, because the machinery had been fully occupied with something else. And the moment the something else was resolved, the machinery had looked round, taken about a fortnight to do it, found the nearest available object of a suitable size, and started up again at precisely the same volume, at precisely the same hour, with precisely the same conviction. He mentioned it to a friend at work a few days afterward, a man of about 60 who had been through 2 of these reviews already and who was famous in that building for being unbothered by anything at all, including things that ought to have bothered him. And the friend said something without looking up from what he was doing that finished the thought off entirely. He said, "I've got a leak in mine. Bucket in the loft. I'm not lying awake." He did have the roof done in the end that September, and it cost about half what he had decided it would cost at 2 in the morning. And he says, and this is the part he finds funniest, and the reason he tells the story at all, that within about 3 weeks of the scaffolding coming down, he was lying awake about his daughter's car, which was a perfectly good car. Come back now, gently, to your own room, to the dark and the weight of the blankets and the breath moving quietly in and out. Here is the thing that story is for, and it is the last idea of the night, and it is the one that changes what tonight means. Worry is not, in the end, caused by the thing you are worrying about. That sounds wrong, and it sounds like the kind of thing said by somebody who has not had your particular difficulties. Everything about the experience says otherwise. There is a thing, and it is genuinely difficult, and the worry is obviously about the thing. But look at the evidence, which is all in your own life and does not require you to take anybody's word for it. Go back 5 years, or 10, if 5 is too close, and find what you were worrying about then. Not vaguely, and not the general shape of that period. Actually find one specific thing. There will have been something. It will have felt enormous at the time, and entirely unlike the ordinary run of difficulties, and it will have kept you awake in this same bed, in this same position, with this same feeling in your chest, and the same certainty that it had to be resolved before anything else could be all right. Take a moment over it. It is worth the moment. Now, has it resolved? Almost certainly. One way or another, well or badly, it is over. You know how the story came out, and are you lying awake tonight? Yes, here you are, at 1 in the morning, in exactly the same position, with a different object in the machine. That is the whole argument, and it is why, when this is sorted out, I will be able to relax has never once been true for anybody in the history of the world. It has been said several billion times, in every language there is, by people of every temperament and in every circumstance. It has never once been followed by relaxation. Go and check that against your own life rather than believing me. Find the last time you said it. Once this is over, I can breathe. And then find what happened in the fortnight after it was over. The thing gets sorted out, and there is a gap of a few days, sometimes 3, sometimes a fortnight. And then the mechanism finds a slate. The tradition noticed this a very long time ago and put it more generally than we need to tonight. That the grasping and the pushing away attach themselves to whatever happens to be in front of them, and that the object is more or less incidental. Take one away, and the same movement of mind simply reaches for the next thing within range. It is not a statement about your particular difficulties. It is a description of how the machinery operates in everybody, because it is a mechanism. It is a habit running on its own schedule, and the content is not the cause. The content is simply whatever happened to be available and roughly the right size. Now, I want to be careful here because there is a lazy version of this idea that is not true, and it gets said a great deal, and I am not saying it. Circumstances matter. Of course they matter. Losing your job is worse than not losing your job. Illness is worse than health. Debt is worse than security. A child in trouble is worse than a child who is doing well. And anybody who tells a person in real difficulty that their circumstances are irrelevant has almost certainly never been in any. Resolution is genuinely better. Those 3 days were real, and he had earned them. The claim being made is much narrower than that, and it is this: the habit of worrying is a separate thing from the problems it attaches itself to. It does not arrive with them, and it does not leave with them. It therefore needs its own attention: the chair, the note, the not checking, the softening, rather than sitting patiently in the queue, waiting to be cured by a change in your circumstances that will not cure it. And here is why that is good news at 1 in the morning, and it is the most freeing sentence I know on this subject. If worry is not caused by your circumstances, then peace is not being withheld by them either. You have been operating very reasonably on a postponement. Somewhere in you there is a cue, and it has a sentence at the front of it. When the money is a bit steadier, when this thing at work resolves itself, when the result comes back, when they are settled, and I know they are all right, when the roof is done and the car is sorted and the spring is over, then I will be able to rest properly. Then I will sleep. Look at that cue honestly for a moment, because you have been standing in it your whole life and have never once looked at it directly. It has never once emptied, not for a week. Every single time you have reached the front of it, a new item has been added at the back, usually within a fortnight, and generally without any announcement. And you have never noticed the pattern, because from inside, each new item looks exactly as urgent and as singular as the last one did. There is no version of your life in which the list is empty and rest becomes available. That version of your life has been sitting on the horizon for 40 years, and it has never once arrived. Not for you, and not for anybody else either. Which means, and this is the whole of tonight, if any of it is, that rest is not on the other side of anything. It is not a reward for having got on top of things. It is not something that arrives when the conditions are finally right, because there is no arrangement of conditions that has ever been right for longer than about a fortnight. It is available in the middle of an unresolved life, or it is not available at all. Those are the only two options, and the second one is a description of a life spent waiting. So tonight, with everything exactly as unfinished as it is, nothing has to be settled before you are allowed to sleep. Not the money, not the appointment on the calendar, not the conversation you have been putting off, or the result, or the thing you have been carrying since March and have not told anybody about. All of it can stay exactly where it is, genuinely unresolved, genuinely mattering, while a tired person lies down in a warm room and rests. That is not giving up on any of it, and it is not pretending any of it is fine. It is simply declining to hold the whole of your life in your arms while you sleep, which was never a requirement, and which nobody has ever managed anyway. Put it down on the floor beside the bed, it will still be there. It is not going to be stolen in the night, and none of it will get any worse for being set down for 6 hours by somebody who is tired. And notice what it would actually take to sleep well by the other route. You would need every account settled, every relationship easy, every person you love safe and well and not aging, every piece of your house in order and no news arriving, for one night. and then again the next night, and the night after that. Nobody has ever had that. Not the wealthiest, and not the luckiest, and not the wisest. Not once, for a single night anywhere. Which means that every hour of rest anybody has ever had in the whole history of people lying down in the dark has been taken in the middle of an unfinished life. There has never been another kind. Let us rest here for a while then, with everything unfinished. Let the shoulders come down. Let the arms be heavy. Let the hands lie open on the blanket, holding nothing at all. Let the jaw come apart and the tongue rest low in the mouth, and the space between the eyebrows go smooth and wide. Let the breath come in and go out, and let the out-breath be the longer of the two without your arranging it. Nothing is finished. Nothing needs to be. The list will still be there tomorrow, exactly as long as it is tonight, and you will work at it in daylight the way you always have, and it will never be empty, and that is not a failure of yours. That is what a life is. There is a slate off somewhere above every single one of us, all the time, and there always has been, and the people sleeping soundly tonight are not the ones whose roofs are finished. So let us rest anyway, tonight, with the slate off. When you are ready, we will go on together, one last time, for the end of the night, because we began in a village where the water had gone strange, and we have not been back, and there is a third day still to come. Let us go and stand at that well on the Saturday morning, when nobody has drawn anything for 72 hours, and watch somebody wind the first bucket up. He went up on the Saturday morning at about 7:30, because that is when he did things, and because he wanted to look at it himself before anybody else got there and made a business of it. 3 days exactly. 72 hours, near enough to the hour, since the water had gone back on and the card had gone up in the window of the hall. The well housing sits at the top end of the village, at the point where the lane stops being a lane and becomes a track going up onto the hill. And it was one of those very clear early mornings you sometimes get at the end of a spell of hot weather, with the grass soaking wet, and the light coming across the side of the hill at the low angle that only happens for about 20 minutes, and that nobody in the village would have said a word about. There were already 6 people standing about on the wet grass when he got there. He had a key and a spanner he did not need, and a cloth over his shoulder, none of which turned out to be required. He had not asked anybody to come, and had not expected anybody, and there were 6, including, inevitably, and to nobody's surprise, the fellow from the end of the row, who had brought his own jug and got there first. He unlocked the door and propped it open with the stone that was there for that purpose. He wound the bucket down on the handle, which takes a good while and cannot be hurried, and which he did at exactly the speed he always did it at, while everybody stood there. And he wound it back up, hand over hand, without hurrying, in the way of a man who has done it several thousand times and is not about to do it differently because people are watching. And it came up, and it was clear, not nearly clear, not clearer than it was, not better or promising or on its way. Clear, the way it had been for 150 years, cold and slightly sweet, and tasting faintly of the hill it came out of, with the early light coming through it and the bottom of the bucket perfectly visible under the water. Somebody said something. Somebody usually does at a moment like that, and it is usually not very much and not worth recording. He passed the bucket round, which took a while, and each of them looked into it. The fellow with the jug looked into it for longer than anybody, and he tipped a little of it out onto the wet grass and stood there watching it go into the ground, which took no time at all, and said the only thing he said that morning, which several people remembered afterward, and one of them wrote down. It was never dirty, he said. It was only unsettled. And then he put the bucket back on its hook and locked the door and went home for his breakfast, because there was nothing else to do and nothing else to say. Nobody had done anything at all. That is the entire point of the story, and it is worth saying as plainly as it can be said. Nothing was added to that well, and nothing was taken out of it. Nobody treated it. There was no filter, no chemical, no second visit from anybody, no clever piece of equipment brought up the lane in a van by a man in a fleece. 6 houses in a small village had simply not touched a well for 3 days, imperfectly, grudgingly, with a good deal of muttering and at least one exception. And the well had done the entire thing by itself, while they were all getting on with other matters. The fellow from the end of the row filled his jug and drank some of it standing there in front of everybody, and pronounced it fine, which from him was a considerable statement. His own tap, it turned out when he got home, ran cloudy for another day and a half after everybody else's had come right, because of everything he had stirred up at his end of the pipe. He was oddly philosophical about that, which surprised everybody who knew him, and he told people afterward that he had learned something, though he was never entirely able to say what it was, and nobody in the village ever pressed him on it. It cleared in the end, a day and a half later than everybody else's, and just as completely. They always do in the end. There is a small thing that happened afterward, and it is the last bit of the story. For about a year after that, whenever anybody in the village had any sort of job done on the pipes, and there were 2 more because it was an old system, somebody would put a card in the window of the hall without being asked. Different handwriting each time. And after the second of them, somebody added a line underneath in different ink, which stayed up there for years afterward and was still on the glass when the hall was finally redecorated. It clears on its own. It always has. Come back now, one last time, to your own room, to the pillow and the dark and the weight of the blanket and your own breathing going quietly on without you. Here is where we finish, and it is the same sentence, and it is the only thing worth taking to sleep. Nothing about you needs fixing tonight. It only needs to be left alone for long enough to settle. That is not a small claim dressed up as a large one. It is simply the plainest available description of what has actually been happening in you since about 11 o'clock this evening. Go back over the night and notice that not one of the things we looked at was a fault in you. The mind you have tonight is not broken. It is doing precisely what any mind does when it is tired and unlit and has been stirred by a day. It is running its repair mode with no light and the wrong tools. It is checking the bucket every few minutes because it wants to know. It is branching, because that is what planning does. When there is no information to stop it, it is holding a door open with its foot because nobody has told it who else is holding it, and it is bracing hard against something that weighs nothing at all. Every one of those is a good system doing its job at the wrong hour. None of that is damage. All of it is disturbance. And disturbance given a bit of time and left alone, does the one thing it has always reliably done. It settles. That is all it does, and it does it without supervision, and it has done it every night of your life. Not because you managed it correctly tonight, not because you did the exercises properly, or believed anything, or understood a word of what has been said since 11 o'clock, not as a reward for having understood any of tonight, or for having done the 20 minutes, or for having got the sentence right. The couple who came back from Scotland did nothing at all, and were not even in the village, and had the clearest water in it. The settling does not require you. It never has. And that is worth taking to bed rather than the rest of it, because it is the one piece of tonight that does not depend on your doing anything with it. You could forget every word between here and the morning, and it would still be true of you, in the same way that it was true of the well while everybody in the village was asleep and not thinking about water at all. Something in you is already doing this and has been all along. It has been doing it quietly underneath the whole of this evening, in the gaps between the words, while you were busy listening to a story about a horse in a yard. It does not announce itself, and it does not need to be believed in. And notice, on the way out, what none of tonight has asked of you. Nobody has told you to stop worrying. Nobody has suggested that what you are carrying does not matter, or is not real, or would look smaller to a wiser person. Nobody has asked you to think positively about anything, or to be grateful, or to find the lesson in it. The whole of it has been a scheduling matter and a question of what you do with your hands. Not now, because the light is bad. Not tonight, because the offices are shut. 6:30, in the chair, with a pen. One line in a note. Do not put the bucket back down the well. Wish them well instead of rehearsing the disaster. Hold the leg and stop fighting it. That is the entire content of 3 hours, and none of it requires you to be any different tomorrow than you were this morning. Let us close the evening here then, with nothing to do. Let the breath come in, and let it go out, and let the out-breath be the longer of the two without your arranging it. Let the shoulders come down one last time. Let the arms be heavy. Let the hands lie open on the blanket, holding nothing at all. Let the jaw come apart, and the tongue rest low in the mouth, and the eyelids be heavy, and the space between the eyebrows go smooth and wide. Feel the warmth under the blanket, and the cooler air on your face, and let both of them be true at once. Let the whole weight of you be handed over to the bed, the head, the shoulders, the back, the hips, the legs, the heels, given completely to something that has been holding you all night without being asked and without any help from you. We have kept a good deal of company tonight. There was a mantel clock in pieces on a wobbly kitchen table under a light that lit the hob, and a man on the floor at 2 a.m. with a torch in his teeth, looking for a clock spring that was in plain sight at 8 o'clock the next day. There was a well going cloudy under a slate roof after 2 days of digging, and a card in the window of a village hall that nobody quite managed to obey for 3 days. There was a woman with 3 printed timetables and 2 highlighters and 16 versions of a single morning that was cancelled on the Thursday, and 4 flights of stairs that were not in any one of them. There was a bookkeeper in a cold office in her coat who spent 11 hours of a weekend on a single penny and felt a heavy door click shut somewhere when she found it. There was a skipper who touched the top corner of a door frame for 40 years and wore the paint pail doing it, and knew exactly what it was worth. There was a doctor 2 years off retiring who wrote out 20 minutes in a chair on a prescription pad, and a man who read it twice and thought he was being made fun of. There was a boy in a yard holding a horse's back leg who locked every muscle he had, and a farrier who took the same leg and gave the same horse nothing at all to lean on. There was a nurse in soft shoes walking a 14-bed ward at 3:10, stopping at a bed where the eyes were open, telling somebody in an ordinary voice that they were not the only one awake. And there was a man who read the letter he had wanted for 11 months, standing in his hallway with his coat on, and slept 9 hours, and was lying awake about a slate within a fortnight. You do not need to remember any of them. Nobody is going to ask you about any of it in the morning, and none of it works better for having been remembered, and a story you slept through has done its job rather better than one you stayed awake for, and nothing needs to be carried forward from any of it. If one thing stayed, the workshop with no light, 6:30 in the chair, soft is not slack. You are not the only one awake. It clears because you leave it. Let that be enough. One is plenty. One is a good deal more than most nights leave behind. And if nothing stayed at all, that is enough as well. There was never anything here to learn. It was a long, slow night with a voice in it, keeping you company while a well went quietly clear somewhere in the dark, with nobody watching it and nobody helping. So let the whole of it go now, all at once. The stories, the teachings, the words, the whole 3 hours of it. And let the worry go too. Not solved, not answered, not smaller, not understood, and not because you finally managed to do something correctly with it at 3 a.m. Just set down on the floor beside the bed, where it will be perfectly safe until morning. May the checking stop in its own time, without being forced. May whatever has been stirred in you be given the 3 days it needs. May you be spared the work of solving anything at all before the light comes. And may you rest now, in a night that is asking absolutely nothing of you and never was. Whatever you brought to bed with you tonight, you may set it down now, on the floor beside you, in a room where nothing at all is happening. It will still be there in the morning if you want it, and there will be daylight and other people and the right tools. Thank you for spending these quiet hours here. It has been good to sit with you in the dark, and there is nothing at all left to do, and no need to remember a word of it. There is nothing to fix. There never was. There is only something to let settle, in its own time, in the dark, without you. Let the breath come, and let it go, and let it come again on its own. And let the night take you. Sleep well, and good night.